do it. He's a wimp.
You know, no, I can do it. I can do it.
Welcome to Poets Speak. I'm Chard Nord, the Poet Laureate of Vermont, and this week I'm very happy to welcome Gary Margolis to the studio. Gary's the author of 4 books of poetry: Raking the Winter Leaves, New and Selected Poems; Fire in the Orchard, which was published in 2002 and was nominated for the Pulitzer Prize for poetry. Falling Awake, which was published in 1986 by the University of Georgia Press. The Day We Still Stand Here was published in 1983 by the University of Georgia Press. Gary is also the author of Runner Without a Number, which was published in 2015, I believe. He's a Robert Frost Fellow at the Bread Loaf Writers Conference and a recipient of a Vermont Council of the Arts Award. He's published his poems in several magazines, several literary journals, including Poetry, The American Scholar, Poetry Northwest, and many others. Gary's a licensed psychologist, a former executive director of counseling and former associate professor of English at the Middlebury College in Vermont here. He lives now in Cornwall, Vermont, where he's a volunteer firefighter. Gary, it's a great pleasure to welcome you to Poets Speak. I wonder if we could start by just hearing a poem of yours, a poem of your choice that you would like to read.
Be happy to, Chard, and thanks for this invitation. And to have a beautiful summer ride from Cornwall down to Brattleboro. This poem is called The Hand of Peace. In the 50s, on the first early morning talk show hosted by Dave Garroway, who has since died by his own hand, the Kellogg Company sponsored a contest for cats and dogs their owners claimed could talk. A panel of judges, speech therapists, and lexicographers listened to the howls and whines, the growling barks and meows, and judged which sounds were closest to human speech. Each pet spent a minute making the most of his voice, and his master was paid increasing amounts for any noise that turned into a syllable and then a word. A boxer from Indianapolis, loyal to her time, sang the name Eisenhower so well the general himself invited her to the White House and later took the dog on his campaign. Across the country, pet owners were mouthing 2- and 3-syllable words in front of their pets, except the parakeet and the mynah bird, disqualified because of their skill to mimic real talk. A Vermonter thought of bringing in a Canada goose that kept flying over her in the 1950s, who flew in a flock that looked more like a tuning fork than a V. Each time he honked, he barked the words, "Look, look." Even if she could have caught him, it's unclear how he would have done sitting on the spot under those hot studio lights. Dave Garroway sat there for 20 years and signed off each show with his hand held up, Indian style, which today, flying over, the geese still look for as a sign of peace.
Thank you. Wonderful poem. What inspired that?
That's a good question, Chard. To try to remember kind of what inspired the poem. I think it's probably a combination of things. As you noted, in my working life, I've been a psychologist, and so the relationship between poetry and counseling work and the people and situations that cross that path. In all of its richness, I think has that combination in that poem, meaning the memory of Dave Garroway specifically, and the sadness of how he ended his life, but then simultaneous to that, also the memory of this wonderfully playful television show that did invite people to bring in pets who could mimic, if not speak, some human words, or close to it. So the poem kind of playfully intersects those, but also has its seriousness around Dave Garroway's life, and also how both animals and ourselves are trying to find the words and the language and to make our own sounds too.
Right, our own music.
Yeah, our own music.
Yeah.
And like a number of contemporary poems too, how poems kind of weave political, or at least the gesture toward the political. So in this poem, it's playfully toward President Eisenhower.
Yeah.
And the imagination.
Yeah.
That he would bring this particular pet on his campaign trail.
Right. You consistently bring ordinary life into your poems, ordinary daily experience, and I notice that you have an amazing discipline in your writing. You sometimes post a poem a day on Facebook. I've noticed. Could you talk a little bit about your writing process and how that works exactly? It's as if you're panning for gold every day, poetry gold, and finding enough of it to keep going.
Almost 9 years ago now, I completed my long work at Middlebury College in counseling, and I didn't think of it as a retirement. I thought of it as completing my service, but also having been a high school and college athlete, the practice of going to practice and being with the activity, and being with, in this case, poetry, being with the material. Yeah. That as I was making that transition into retirement, after a morning walk, a daily morning walk of about an hour, I would go into my study, and something that had not been pre-planned, some line, some image, some imagination around a particular speaker would inevitably, and has inevitably, emerged. And then I would say to myself, start writing from that phrase. Not knowing where it was going, hopefully, but attending to what was happening as the poem was emerging. Meaning it, as you said before, the music, image, metaphor, narrative, pieces of phrases. And so that practice then more recently, meaning the last few years, intersected with Facebook. And as I've been writing these poems, with really very little expectation about their continuity.
Yeah.
Meaning, how long would I keep doing this?
Yeah.
What really has inspired them in some ways is I'm getting to the end of a first draft with them. The idea that somebody that I might know, or be a near stranger, or someone far away, might actually be receiving the poem, hearing it.
Yeah.
It has really what's been carrying the energy of the practice.
So it's opened up a whole new vista for you in many ways, as far as audience. I noticed there's a fascinating quality of anonymity in a lot of your work. You as the kind of selfless observer. I mean, the title of your book, your most recent book, even "Runner Without a Number," which is actually about the Boston Marathon, has really created a wonderful conceit in your speaker throughout a lot of your poems, and it must come from having done therapy or been a therapist for many years as well. Just listening, and then how to convert that listening into poetry and those stories that you hear or heard every day as a therapist, which have a kind of specificity to them, but not necessarily a poetry.
Right.
Moving from those stories to poetry, trying to make that leap with as little irritable reaching as possible.
Yeah. Thanks for your observation with that, which is, as a therapist, a counselor, and hours of being in with and in the presence, of the other person, and listening very specifically to, to their struggles, their struggles and their stories, and the way they are telling their own story.
Yeah.
The rhythm of those stories.
Right.
And with the language that they're choosing. But it's been a lifetime of listening.
Yeah.
And responding.
The right time.
Yeah. Some people tease me that I went to graduate school in order to be able to nod my head at the right time. But that listening has been finding its voice in these poems, where I'm thinking about not only who or what will receive them, but the context of time, time beyond us.
Do you have a poem that addresses that? I mean, the other. I mean, Blake has this wonderful quote, William Blake, there's the most sublime act that one can commit or enact is to set another before him. And which is what therapy, in a way, is all about, listening, the act of listening, which can become a kind of sacred exercise. But I wondered if you had a poem. I love your poem about Galway Canal, where you're setting him before you. I mean, you're in the audience there with a lot of other people during an official event, but you are viewing him as this important other who's being recognized at the State House. I think it's near the end of the book here. It's on, let's see.
Yeah, I have it.
You got it? Okay.
I have it. So like many of us, I mean, I was fortunate to cross paths with Galway in a number of circumstances.
We should just say who Galway was,
Yes.
for maybe those who don't know. He was the Poet Laureate of Vermont after Robert Frost, 25 years or so after Robert Frost. The state legislature decided that there should be another Poet Laureate besides Robert Frost, and they appointed Galway in 1989. And of course, he was just a gigantic figure in the poetry world in this country and internationally. Won the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award and so forth and so on, and decided to live up in Sheffield, Vermont after teaching, well, actually beginning in the early 60s, but he commuted back and forth between NYU and where he taught and Sheffield and made his home there.
Yes. And as we know, thank goodness while he was alive, he was honored at the State House.
Right.
By a wonderful set of poets and readers and family members.
Yes.
At that reading. So this was a way both to commemorate that, and at the same time to go beyond that particular moment too. And it's called For Galway Cannell at the State House. Under Washington, his portrait, in this chamber, the well of the house, we've come to honor one of our own. Word neighbor, poem maker, champion of using is 3 times rightly, consecutively in a verses line. Here, where our state's once governor welcomes us, asks what our state would be if we, well-sitting poets, were voted in to cast our votes. We're sitting at their desks with the aye and nay switch at hand, listening to his words read back to him by our poetry's representatives. His writing, singing airs, who, as Frost said, say his poems into the listening air. Our poet sitting among us, holding his hand to his ear, speaker-like. Although you can be sure he can read their lips for a scent of bare love moaning from a bedroom, a field's lipstick of blueberries, as well as for the pause between words, where he lives too in our fortunate Vermont. We can fill a well with the songs of Galway Cannell, whom we can't do without,